Breaking news this Friday night. The Prime Minister meets with America's next president. The trip to Florida that wasn't on Justin Trudeau's public itinerary. Ready, set, shop. Canadians are expected to spend big this holiday season, but why many businesses are dreading the GST break.
The implementation of this holiday is a hot mess.
BC's class action lawsuit against opioid makers, what the province hopes to accomplish. Restored after a devastating fire, the first look inside Paris's Notre-Dame Cathedral. Plus, looking for clues in polar bear droppings.
This is as close as I ever planned to get to touching a polar bear.
Why Canadian scientists are doing the dirty work to study the impact of climate change.
Global National. Reporting tonight, Jeff Semple.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. We begin with breaking news. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's plane has just touched down in Florida. He's there for a meeting with incoming U.S. President Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago. That trip comes just days after Trump threatened to impose a 25% tariff on all imports. Our Ottawa Bureau Chief, Mercedes Stephenson, joins me now. So, Mercedes, this trip took almost everyone by surprise. What can you tell us about it?
It sure did, Jeff. It was nowhere on the Prime Minister's official itinerary when it went out today. It just said he was going to be in PEI, but I'm told he stopped in Ottawa. And at that point, we saw his plane take off and start heading south. We started asking the Prime Minister's office where it was going, and they went uncharacteristically silent. And as we watched it progressing further and further south, it was very clearly on a trajectory for Florida and landed in West Palm Beach Airport. That, of course, is the airport that is the closest to Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago compound. And we have been told that he is there to meet with Donald Trump. He's going to be meeting with him tonight, staying in West Palm Beach overnight, the Prime Minister, but not staying at Mar-a-Lago. So they're going to get together and have a talk, and I'm sure we can guess and get into what that's going to be. But a surprise trip by Justin Trudeau to see Donald Trump in person.
All right. And as mentioned, this trip comes in the wake of that tariff threat. So what do you think the strategy is here?
I think that the strategy is something that those close to Trump know, and that's for him, all politics are personal. So that face-to-face relationship and how he feels about someone is really important. And senior Republican officials have told me Donald Trump, not a big fan of Justin Trudeau's. So Justin Trudeau has to go down there, he has to try to turn on the charm, and he has to convince the president-elect that he's serious about the border and that it is in both countries' interests not to impose these kinds of tariffs. So it tells you Justin Trudeau is very concerned about that possible 25% and that he's trying to use a strategy that has worked in the past. And I guess we'll see where it goes tomorrow.
We'll see. A high-stakes trip. Thanks, Mercedes. Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa. This is officially Canada's busiest shopping day of the year, and Black Friday is one many Canadian businesses are counting on to provide a much-needed boost after many months of high inflation and low consumer spending. And heading into the holidays, it appears that Canadians are loosening their purse strings. Take a look at this. According to a new report, Canadian households are expected to spend an average of nearly $1,500 this holiday season. That is 10% higher than last year. And along with Black Friday discounts, shoppers could also see more bargains in the coming weeks as part of the federal government's planned GST holiday. Last night, Liberal and NDP MPs voted to pass the temporary tax break. Mackenze Gray reports on what it could mean for shoppers and why many businesses aren't buying it.
Alors, s'il vous plaît.
For the first time in 6 months,
Mr. May Cambridge.
the Liberals have passed a spending bill through the House of Commons, with Justin Trudeau needing the NDP to get his GST pause through. The Bloc and Conservatives voting against. A political wedge the PM used against Pierre Poilievre.
That's putting politics and his own interests ahead of what Canadians actually need.
The bill proposes to take the GST or HST off goods like diapers, kids' clothes, and pre-made food, but also off less essential items like beer, wine, and video games. A confusing patchwork for many businesses, including this Calgary grocery store.
It's great that people are saving money. We're all for that. But the amount of money it's costing a small business is a lot, and it's a headache.
A cross-country headache, with a survey from the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses showing that 75% of small businesses feel it'll be costly and complicated to implement, and for limited upside. Only 4% believe they'll have stronger sales from it.
The implementation of this holiday is a hot mess. They found in Ottawa the most complicated possible way to do that,
leading some businesses to take the GST off all products, regardless if they're included in the pause or not.
Sure, it's easy when you sell, 6 super yachts a year or something like that to leave it on or take it off, but not for an average store.
The bill was supposed to include provisions to send out $250 checks to nearly 19 million people, but that was pulled on Wednesday after objections from the NDP on eligibility for some low-income Canadians. Trudeau unwilling to say if he'd expand who'd get the cash.
And we wanted to be there to recognize and invest in working Canadians with a $250 check that'll be rolling out in April.
The GST pause still needs to pass the Senate, Jeff, and the timeline to do that is tight. December 14th is when the Liberals have promised their GST pause will come into force.
Mackenze Gray in Ottawa. Thanks, Mac. And that expected surge in holiday spending might be due in part to the fact that Canadians' household savings and disposable income grew in the third quarter of this year. That's according to a new report from Statistics Canada. But overall, the Canadian economy continues to struggle. GDP rose at a rate of just 1% in the third quarter. That's lower than the Bank of Canada was expecting and marks the 6th consecutive quarter of negative growth. Analysts say higher interest rates continue to stifle business investment. And the Canada Post strike is doing further damage to the economy. That's according to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. The organization, which represents 200,000 businesses, says retailers are being hit particularly hard, and it's calling on the federal government to intervene. The Canada Post strike is now entering its third week with no end in sight. A government-appointed mediator suspended talks this week, claiming both sides were too far apart. And the Canada Post strike may affect some online retailers this Black Friday, but it's been a busy day for brick and mortar stores right across the country. According to the Retail Council of Canada, 40% of Canadians plan to go shopping today. As Karen Lieberman reports, the inflation crunch has more Canadians hunting for deals.
I'm kind of just looking for some sales. I just bought this hat, so.
Sephora had some really good deals, and like a lot of the stores, especially like Lululemon, but it's still like really expensive.
Good morning. Black Friday is a major annual event for retailers looking to capture consumers in search of big holiday bargains. But shoppers say this year looks a little different.
I like the 50% offs, the 60s. They just haven't seen many of them.
Deloitte Canada's Holiday Retail Outlook found 8 out of 10 consumers plan to shop around for the best deals.
I would want to see that closer to 50-60% off, because if you just look anywhere online, that's the deals you're seeing.
7 out of 10 plan to shop at retailers offering the lowest prices, search for items on sale, and change brands if their preferred choice is too expensive.
Things are definitely more expensive this year than they were in the previous years.
But 42% of consumers surveyed still believe Black Friday offers the best deals of the season. This Black Friday falls a full 5 days later than the last, meaning retailers have a shorter window, plus other factors to consider.
If you look at prices from 2019 to now, they're up about 15%, which is a lot. And you look at, unemployment's a little high at 6.5%. So there's a number of headwinds that consumers are facing.
What would it take for you to make a purchase today?
I think if there's good enough deals, like sales that are like decent in price, that'd be good.
Consumers also know the sales last longer than a day.
Most of these deals have been online for about a week now.
Inflation's coming down, but consumer confidence is not really recovering. People don't see it in the paychecks. They don't see it at the grocery store. And so we have a consumer that's saying, this is the time to be saving.
Karen Lieberman, Global News.
Big news out of the world of soccer tonight. John Herdman, the coach of Toronto FC, who also led the Canadian men's and women's national teams, is resigning. Herdman announced his resignation from Toronto FC late today without saying why. He had been linked to the controversy over the alleged use of drones to spy on opposing teams' practices. And under his leadership, Toronto FC's performance has also been lacking, with the team missing the playoffs for a 4th straight year. Prince Edward Island has become the latest province to sign on to the federal government's National School Food Program. In Charlottetown, the Prime Minister announced more than $7 million over 3 years to fund school nutrition programs. The federal government says the funding will result in around 480,000 meals served to students in PEI this school year. Newfoundland and Labrador, Manitoba, and Ontario have already signed on to that program. Well, if you have cucumbers in your fridge, you might want to take a closer look. Some are being recalled due to potential salmonella contamination. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency says the company Sunfed Produce is recalling all sizes of cucumbers sold between October the 12th and November the 26th. Those products should be thrown out. Canada's top court has overwhelmingly approved a law granting British Columbia the right to pursue a class action lawsuit against the makers of opioids on behalf of all provinces and territories and the federal government. Drug companies had argued that law was too sweeping, but as Touria Izri reports, the court ruled that more cooperation is needed on issues of national significance, including the opioid epidemic.
The opioid crisis has gripped Canada for more than a decade, with British Columbia at the epicenter. Now that province can take on drug companies on behalf of the entire country.
The opioid crisis has caused a lot of damage, not only in BC, but also across the country.
The Supreme Court has cleared the way for BC to represent all provinces, territories, and the federal government in a single class action lawsuit against the country's leading pharmacies and generic drug makers.
If the other provinces don't opt out and pursue their own claims, they can basically just piggyback off of BC's efforts.
But the companies, including Shoppers Drug Mart, argued the province was overstepping. In a 6-1 decision, the Supreme Court disagreed. When products, people, and problems cross jurisdictional boundaries, cooperation is vital to ensure that justice is not blocked by provincial borders.
While there have been many class action lawsuits representing multiple people across Canada, there have never been class action lawsuits representing multiple governments. And that's why this decision is so significant.
Shoppers' parent company, Loblaw, said it was disappointed in the outcome, as this decision almost guarantees a much longer, more expensive, complex, and inefficient process. Since 2016, illicit drugs have killed nearly 16,000 British Columbians, while opioids alone have taken the lives of more than 47,000 Canadians over the last 8 years, an average of 21 people a day. It's a crisis that's personal for Vancouver's former mayor, Kennedy Stewart.
I've lost 2 family members, one last week to poison drugs. Susan and Kyle are dead now because of government inaction.
Stewart says all levels of government need to act urgently and not wait for the outcome of a class action lawsuit that may take years to wind its way through court as more Canadians die. Touria Izri, Global News, Ottawa.
After a 6-year legal saga, BC's second-largest city of Surrey is now under the jurisdiction of its own municipal police force, replacing the RCMP. The issue had dominated city politics and even landed in court. In May, BC's Supreme Court ruled Surrey would indeed transition to its own policing service, which should be complete by 2027. Anger erupts in Georgia. Coming up. Why protesters say they're fighting to save their democracy. Tensions are escalating in Syria. For the first time since 2016, insurgents have entered its second-largest city of Aleppo. The advance is part of a surprise offensive launched on Wednesday. At least 27 people have died. The violence reignites a long-running conflict that had largely been static for years. And for a second straight night, clashes are breaking out in the streets of Georgia. Police used water cannons, pepper spray, and tear gas on the crowds. Dozens were arrested. Opposition supporters are angry that the government is suspending talks to join the European Union. They say the shift is further evidence the government is trying to move closer to Russia's sphere of influence. Redmond Shannon reports.
Back outside Parliament and on the streets of Tbilisi. For the second night running, Georgian riot police confront pro-European protesters, furious at the government's decision to push back talks to join the EU by 4 years. Journalists and activists say police have targeted them in ways not seen previously in this year of protests in Georgia. Among the injured, these campaigners suffering a broken nose and a broken arm.
It was a violence, ordinary violence that you can see in Russia, Belarus, or in any authoritarian state.
Critics accuse the ruling Georgian Dream Party of trying to move Georgia under Russia's influence. Georgia paused the EU membership process on the same day the EU called for a rerun of last month's parliamentary elections. Brussels cited reports of voter intimidation, suppression, and even vote buying.
The Prime Minister sort of beat them to it to make it look like it's the Georgian Dream that's sort of controlling the situation.
The EU had already suspended Georgia's membership process this year, reacting to a new law that targeted non-governmental organizations. Georgian Dream's founder is billionaire Bidzina Ivanishvili, who made his fortune in Russia.
He's absolutely the puppet master behind the Georgian Dream.
The predominantly young urban protesters think it's obvious what's happening.
Us Georgians who fought for years to defeat Russians, and now what is happening?
To become independent, like we've done so much to become who we are today.
Georgia's figurehead president is pro-European, but finishes her term in December. It's expected her successor will side with the government. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Getting their hands dirty. Still ahead, Canadian scientists have a new strategy to study polar bears. Studying polar bear populations can be difficult and potentially dangerous work, so Canadian scientists have adopted a new strategy to study the protected species. As Heidi Petracek reports, they're looking at what the bears leave behind.
Turns out this is the easiest way to study polar bears.
So this is wild polar poop.
Yeah,
That's what
this is poop from the polar bears. This is as close as I ever planned to get to touching a polar bear. So.
Yep, that is polar bear poo, and plenty of it, gathered for research at Dalhousie University.
Do you eat lunch after this?
It's not a problem. It's okay.
These scat samples come from two groups of polar bears. The first, wild ones that ended up in polar bear jail in Churchill, Manitoba for getting too close to town. And the other, bears living permanently in captivity at the Cochrane Polar Bear Habitat.
It was a lot of fun getting to take part in something that was directly correlating to what's going on in the wild.
If you call fecal matter fun. But it is important because researchers wanted to find out how changes in the bears' diets affect their gut microbiome.
Our gut microbiome tells us a lot about us. It can tell us about our health, our diet.
By digging into the dung, Collins and her team determined the two groups have distinctly different microbiomes, giving them a baseline for future studies on polar bear health.
We think we know everything, but we're really learning a lot about them. So the more we know, the more we can prove to those people in power that they need protection.
And that's crucial as shrinking ice because of climate change leaves their preferred meal, seals, out of reach, forcing the bears to find alternatives. Collins hopes knowing exactly what that could do to their health means also finding ways to help.
Whatever is good for them is good for us.
Even if that leads to more work that's kind of, well, you know. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Bible Hill, Nova Scotia.
To an update now on what's been called the world's most expensive fruit. This is cryptocurrency entrepreneur Justin's son eating a banana that he purchased for more than $6 million at an auction last week. The artwork, known as Comedian, is literally just a banana duct taped to a wall. Up next, the first look inside the restored Notre-Dame Cathedral. Notre-Dame Cathedral opened its doors today. The heart of Paris, as it's often called, has been closed for more than 5 years after it was gutted by a fire. As Mike Armstrong shows us, today the world got its first glimpse inside.
The first official visitor to walk through the doors of Notre-Dame de Paris was an emotional Emmanuel Macron. The French president says he remembers the day of the fire like it was yesterday, but the feeling on this day
On a le sentiment de la redécouvrir.
Was one of rediscovery. The cause of the fire that ripped through Notre-Dame de Paris in April of 2019 still isn't known. There are theories it may have been an electrical fault or a discarded cigarette. But The French capital came very close to losing a medieval masterpiece.
Nous rebâtirons la cathédrale Notre-Dame.
It was within hours that Macron pledged to rebuild, setting 2024 as the goal to reopen. That is happening. The cathedral will celebrate its first Mass next Sunday and reopen to the public that evening. Also invited in Friday were hundreds of craftspeople who worked on the project, welcomed back to be thanked.
N'oubliez jamais.
Macron told them to never forget what they repaired and reinvented. Each made sacrifices for 5 years, he said, but kept the promise to rebuild. More than $1 billion was donated to the project from around the world. According to the government, there's actually money left for other projects around the building. The way it looks now is cleaner and brighter than it's been in centuries.
On a quand même la sensation qu'elle a été bâtie hier.
Feels as though the cathedral is new, says stonemason Adrien Willem, as though it was just born.
Comme le montre cette image.
Now, there was one person missing Friday. The man who headed the project for the first 3 years died in 2023.
Il aurait dû être avec nous.
He should have been with us, Macron says. I think he'd have been proud and happy. Macron also called the project a metaphor for the nation. Each person played a role individually, but together accomplished something that otherwise would have been impossible. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
And next week, our Redmond Shannon will be in Paris for the official reopening of Notre-Dame to give us a sense of what the reconstruction means for Parisians and pilgrims alike. Looking forward to that. And that is Global National for this Friday. I'm Jeff Semple. Tonight's Your Canada is the Saskatchewan Legislative Building in snowy Regina. Please keep emailing your photos to globalnational@globalnews.ca. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you back here again tomorrow. Have a great night.